All right, welcome everyone. We are so excited to have you here for this two-part webinar series on human trafficking in collaboration with the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops and Catholic Charities USA. My name is Felicitas Brugo. I oversee the anti-trafficking portfolio for the USCCB and the Department of Migration and Refugee Services. This first part webinar will be talking about the myths, realities, and the role of faith-based organizations. I'm here with Diego Luque from DHS and Christy Williams from CCUSA, and I'll hand it over for them to introduce themselves as well.
Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for having me. I'm Diego Luque. I am one of the prevention specialists here on the Blue Campaign. I have been in the anti-trafficking sphere for about 3 years, all with Homeland Security. And it's just an honor for you guys to include us in this very important topic, in this very important chat. So just very grateful to be here. Thank you.
Hi everyone. I was hoping my video would work. A lot of technical difficulties today, and so we're so grateful for your patience. I am the Director of Social Policy and Government Affairs for Catholic Charities USA. Really grateful to be working with these two brilliant people with a broad range of expertise on this issue. I lead Catholic Charities USA's advocacy portfolio on human trafficking. And we're really great to have you join us this afternoon. And I guess we'll dig in. Felicitas, would you like me to go to the next slide so we can get started? I know we are 5 minutes into it. Awesome. Just tell me when and I'll advance the slide. Oh, and you should see the chat feature on your screen. Feel free to drop in the chat feature your questions, your reactions to anything you hear, or any feedback you may have about the conversation. We would love to hear from you, and tell us where you're from, which parts of the country you're from as well. Drop them in the chat so we know who are joining us or where you're joining us from. But yeah, Felicitas, you want to take it from here?
Yep, that's great. So thanks so much, Christy, for all that. Yeah, feel free, everyone, to ask questions throughout. We'll take questions more towards the end of the webinar as well. We'd love to know where you all are coming from and signing in from. So a little bit about the outline. We're going to do some quick definitions, myths versus realities. What is the church's role in human trafficking? Some legislative summary and advocacy pieces, and some Q&A. Christy, feel free to go next. So I like to always start with a prayer. So please join me in prayer if you would like, but I'll just read through this in the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Loving Father, we seek your divine protection for all those who are exploited and enslaved, for those forced into labor, trafficked into sexual slavery, and denied freedom. We beseech you to release them from their chains, grant them protection, safety, and empowerment, restore their dignity, and provide them with a new beginning. Show us how we might end exploitation by addressing its causes. Help us reach out in support of victims and survivors of human trafficking. Make us instruments of your Spirit in their liberation. For this we pray through our Lord Jesus Christ, who lives and reigns with you in the unity of the Holy Spirit, one God, forever and ever. Amen. In the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. You can go to the next slide, Christy. So I always like to kind of, I'm not entirely sure everyone's background on human trafficking or on the anti-trafficking work. And so I always like to keep it pretty broad and just put the defining terms out there. I know this might be repetitive. I know Christy will dive into some of the legislative pieces, and so will Diego. So, bear with us as we kind of go through all of this. But some of the defining terms, human trafficking in the United States and internationally is pretty much defined as the use of force, fraud, or coercion to induce someone into labor or sexual exploitation. Human trafficking also is a form of modern-day slavery. It's a violation of human rights, and it is a federal crime in the United States. And the Global Slavery Index reports that there's an estimate of around 49.6 million people living in situations of trafficking at any given moment in time. And around 1 million of those reside in the United States. The Global Slavery Index has really good reports and really, kind of in-depth reports on information that on anti-trafficking at the global level and at the local level. So for those interested, always, feel free to look up their website and they'll have some more updated statistics. I also like to point out that modern day slavery is used more often in Europe and in Africa and Asia. With some of the organizations we work with, the term modern day slavery tends to be used more, versus in the United States, human trafficking is the terminology that we like to use a little bit more. But they are both talking usually about the same thing. Next slide. So just a little more on the defining terms. So the largest piece of legislation is the Trafficking Victims Protection Act, the TVPA, or also known as the TVPRA, which is also the Reauthorization Act. It started in 2000, and it's really the first comprehensive federal law to address human trafficking. The TVPA addressed existing gaps in the legal framework by creating new criminal offenses, establishing victim protections, and kind of really focused on that three-pronged approach of prevention, protection, and prosecution. Again, the definition finds itself in the recruitment, harboring, transportation, provision, or obtaining of a person through the use of force, fraud, or coercion for the purpose of subjection to involuntary servitude, peonage, debt bondage, or slavery. And then sex trafficking, in which commercial sex act, is induced by force, fraud, or coercion, or which a person under the age of 18 has, or which a person that was induced has not attained 18 years of age. So any minor in the United States that has engaged in a commercial sex act would be considered a victim of trafficking. Next slide. Great. Then human trafficking and human smuggling. We always kind of hear the interchanging of these two terms, right? Using human smuggling for human trafficking or vice versa. And so human trafficking, again, is that use of the force, fraud, or coercion. And it's what we like to consider the crime against the person. It does not need involvement of movement, but it includes that recruitment and harboring provisions, or obtaining of a person for commercial sex services or labor services. Then human smuggling is more of a consensual relationship, and it's a crime against a country or a state. It involves the movement across international borders to facilitate unlawful entry. It also usually involves a fee, and the relation typically ends when the smuggling is complete. That doesn't mean that situations of smuggling can't sometimes turn as well into situations of trafficking, or that the victimization of trafficking is exacerbated by these vulnerabilities. But human trafficking does not always require the movement across state lines or borders, or international borders as well. And what we often see is that victims of trafficking are trafficked in their own home. We're seeing a lot of trafficking online, right, through social media and phones, and it's really changed throughout the years. And so that's a kind of a big myth that we tend to see people using the terminology in that way. And then next slide. Okay, I think here we hand it out to Diego to take over his piece.
All right. You would think that after 3 years of doing a lot of virtual engagements, COVID and all that, I would hit the mute button, unmute. But yes, that is a great kind of segue. Very well said. I mean, I feel like that's one of the biggest misconceptions here that we hear at Homeland Security is people just kind of confusing these two terms of human smuggling, human trafficking. That's definitely one of those bigger myths. And in this part of this presentation, I'm definitely going to go over some other ones that we hear all the time. But first, I just want to break down who we are, who the Blue Campaign is. There might be a lot of people here that have heard of the Blue Campaign, and there might be some people that haven't. So I am with the National Public Awareness Campaign called the Blue Campaign. We are pretty much the only awareness campaign in Homeland Security that is raising awareness of the crime, that is partnering with organizations throughout the nation to train their employees, train their volunteers on what is human trafficking, how to identify indicators, and also what to do if you do come across the crime of human trafficking. Who do you report to? Does your organization have protocols? So we work with a variety of different private sector and public sector partners to bring these kind of protocols, to bring this information on what human trafficking is, because everybody could play a role in this. It's not only about learning something, but we could share this information with our family. We could share this with our community centers. We could share this information with our houses of worship. So really, we are trying to encompass all these different industries and fields and really bring this information that is so just needed in this country on what human trafficking is. So I'm going to go ahead and get started here. There we go. Okay, so let's go over some additional myths. I know that, the title of this presentation is debunking myths. So we're going to go over some of the more high level myths that we have here on the campaign. And as an awareness campaign, some of the more damaging things to a campaign and awareness campaign are these misconceptions that we hear all the time, whether we're on Facebook strolling, whether we're having conversations with some friends or family members that might, go through what human trafficking is by what they've seen in a movie. So there's a lot of these different myths. So some of the more high level ones. Why does a person attempt to seek help in public? A variety of different reasons. One of them could be, as a law enforcement agency, we definitely understand that victims are not always going to want help from federal law enforcement. They might not have legal standing in the country. They might have gotten arrested before by law enforcement and don't see it, law enforcement as the people that are going to help them. They've been probably brainwashed to understand that law enforcement is bad. So there's going to be a variety of different reasons why they might not want to seek help in public. We also come across that victims have a hard time sometimes self-identifying as victims. Um, there is spouse on spouse trafficking. So if you are getting trafficked by the person that you love, something that we call here Romeo traffickers. So that is falls under one of those elements of fraud. Somebody that pretends to be your lover, pretends to be your partner, and then eventually uses that kind of love to exploit their partner. If that person is getting exploited by the person they love, they're not going to consider themselves victims. They're going to consider themselves going through a hard time. You don't know what their partner has told them to make them do those commercial sex acts, make them, work in something that they don't want to. So that person doesn't self-identify as a victim, but in reality, they're just there under one of those kind of lies that their partner has told them. So a lot of different reasons. So what you see on, on your screen is victims are going to be afraid to seek help because of threats from their trafficker. We've had numerous conversations with victims that they're under threats of force. They might be threatening their families as well. We've had a case that has actually gone on video because we have an entire network of lived experience experts here on the campaign that have made videos explaining the scenarios, explaining the indicators that were missed in their cases. And in one of those cases, by a survivor named Rachel, she speaks that she met her trafficker through they were in a club. They were, dancing, and somebody in a three-piece suit comes up to her and says that he's a modeling agent and, tells her all the nice things that they can make her money. They wanted to get her to a certain level where she could, she wanted to become a school teacher and actually own her own school, like a private charter academy. And they used that dream to lure her in. They would pay her for these modeling gigs. And at one point, they made her sign a W-9. And then once, Rachel kind of saw some things that weren't right, and she tried to get out and, stop the communication between her and these kind of modeling agents, that's when they used the address on her W-9 form to get her to do what they want. And then she was forced into sex act. She was formed into commercial sex act. But it all started through that W-9 form. And she put the parent's address on the form, and they used that information to threaten her. They said that they were going to harm her family. They knew where they lived. They were going to harm her roommate, which she lived with at the time. So the reality is they might be under threats of force. They might not consider themselves victims. And also, they might not trust law enforcement. So a variety of different reasons. Number two, that victims are only foreign-born individuals, that this is not happening to US citizens. This is happening to, and kind of those two crimes of human trafficking, human smuggling. We hear that human trafficking is happening at the border all the time. Like that is the only place that it is happening, and it's only happening to people coming in, or only people coming in are the ones that are trafficking. A lot of confusion there. But the reality is that there is not a single profile for a victim of human trafficking. We have a reported case in all 50 states and US territories. Um, One thing that I like to bring up, just because we see it, is something called familial trafficking. This is something that is happening to kids, that is happening to kids that are being born into families that are exploiting their children as soon as they're born through pictures. And even worse, that person was born in the United States. They didn't have any say what they were going through now, but they were born into that situation. They weren't foreign born, they were born here in our territory. So, not a single profile for any victim of human trafficking. Could be any age, race, gender, nationality, socioeconomic status, really doesn't matter. Not a single profile. And then this last myth: victims are usually physically restrained, held in bondage, otherwise physically abused. And this is that Hollywood myth. This is the myth that we see on movies. We always bring this up, but the movie Taken, I mean, great representation of what a father of the year is. Liam Neeson traveled across the country. He went to a lot of places to try to rescue his family. But the whole time, that is depicting a human trafficking situation that is very dramatized. And I think a lot of Hollywood has dramatized human trafficking situations in movies. And that is what people see, and that is what people believe. But a lot of times, physical force is one of the least elements that we see in human trafficking cases. A lot of these cases are coercion is one of the elements that we mostly prove. When it comes to labor trafficking, we see a lot of fraud as well. Those false job promises, we see a lot. But one of the main elements we see in human trafficking cases that we could prosecute are coercion. And that is in a lot of different ways. But a lot of the damage that is done to victims under coercion is that psychological and emotional forms of abuse, which is why the department right now is really focused on something called a victim-centered approach based on trauma-informed principles when we are working with victims or working with different people that might come into contact with victims. Is helping them understand what trauma is and understand that that person might be damaged in other ways that are not visible. That damage is inside, psychological, emotional, more than physical force. Next slide, please. All right. And we also have to bring up some labor trafficking myths. Something that gets talked a lot about is sex trafficking. We hear it, it's kind of the subject that news outlets want to put out. It's something that sells for movies. We don't really hear about labor trafficking. We don't hear about that one person that was rescued in a pizza parlor because the owner was forcing them to work there for years on years. We don't hear that on the news, but it's real. And depending what part of the country you're in, labor trafficking could actually be more prevalent. So I'm from Florida. In Miami, we see a lot of sex trafficking. That's a lot of what Homeland Security investigations is seeing when it comes to human trafficking. But then we go to the north of the state, around the Panhandle area, where there's a lot of agriculture. We've busted rings there and have, rescued about 30 survivors, 30 victims of human trafficking that were all there under those H-2A, H-2B work visas that were brought here legally from their country on these work visas. But then they were made to overstay those visas, which are renewed on a 6-month basis. They were made to stay, and then they were threatened with deportation, threatened with arrest. They had their IDs confiscated, their passports confiscated, their phones confiscated. They couldn't reach anybody. All they knew was that what they're doing is illegal, and everything that the trafficker told them was supposed to be real, and they would get transported from their home to the work site, from work site to their home. They came here legally. They were not here illegally. They came here on work visas that they acquired in their home country. through some sort of job posting that they saw in their home country, some sort of advertisement. You know, they called, they got them those visas, and then they were in a world of that they didn't know what was happening. They just knew that the traffickers telling them that they're going to get arrested, they're going to get deported if they don't continue working. So a lot of times, especially in labor trafficking, the majority of victims have came here legally on those H-2A, H-2B work visas. Another myth that this is only happening in illegal or these underground industries. No, I mean, a simple Google search will show you that this is happening in both legitimate and illegitimate businesses. We've prosecuted cases in, you know, I bring up the pizza parlor because one of the kind of more uglier sides that I've seen and read through the Department of Justice. They prosecuted one guy and he had like a sort of mom and pop pizza operation in Massachusetts. And it was just one person that he was forcing to work there. But one person is enough. That is too many. And they were forcing them to work in this pizza parlor. So that was a legitimate restaurant at that time. So this is happening in both those legitimate, illegitimate businesses. And just thinking that this is only happening in these underground kind of settings could really help, could really actually kind of fog your vision as to what you are really seeing out there. We've uncovered labor trafficking in construction sites, agricultural field, you know, traveling sales crews, massage parlors, you know, big businesses, little businesses, really not a single business where we're not seeing this. We have seen it in a lot of different settings. So it's important to keep that in mind that both legitimate industries could also be using some sort of forced labor in their work chain. And we kind of went over this one. Felicitas did a really good job of also explaining that human smuggling can turn into human trafficking. Yes, they might have consented to being smuggled into the country, but once you kind of introduce one of those elements of force, fraud, or coercion into the situation, then it becomes human trafficking. We see a lot something called debt bondage. So the smuggler will smuggle the person in, and then, you know, tell them like the trip was a little harder than anticipated, so now you have to work off, you know, the remaining things that you owe us. You know, now you have to work this off in our farm, or you have to work this off in this site, or doing some sort of other activity. Or a lot of times we'll see also that yes, they'll get them into the country and then they'll be like, okay, but now that you're in the country, you have to work for us, or else we're gonna call, you know, we're gonna call somebody and you're gonna get arrested, and then you're going to get sent back to your country. So you have to work for us now. That was not initially agreed upon. So now one of those elements of coercion is introduced. That becomes a human trafficking situation. And, you know, a lot of people we've heard are afraid to report what they're going through. They know that what they're going through is not right, but they're scared because they got smuggled in and then don't report what is happening to them. So that is problematic, especially to get that person help. And getting help doesn't always involve calling Homeland Security. There are so many other ways to report somebody that is going through some sort of situation like that. And it's important to note, you all as faith leaders, as community leaders, um, there are other ways to report aside from Homeland Security that you could call upon. National Human Trafficking Hotline, National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. There are a lot of different avenues for a person to get help, not only help to get their crime investigated, but also help to get them medical help, to get them other resources they might need. Maybe they're afraid to report because their trafficker is giving them a bed where to sleep at night and they don't want to be homeless. They don't want to be housing insecure. There are organizations that are giving beds to people. So a lot of different ways that we could really support victims in this. Next slide, please. All right. So everybody here is in a position where a victim might come up to you, or you might have a conversation with somebody that just doesn't seem right. That's this person is going through something, but you might not really understand what they are going through. But this person has shared with you something that now puts you in a position to be able to support that person. So, one thing I want to focus on this part of the presentation is how Homeland Security is working with faith-based leaders, community organizations, community leaders to bring them this kind of awareness information so that they can appropriately respond to possible cases of human trafficking. in their churches, in their temples, in their organizations. Next slide, please. So I want to hone in really on what we're calling this victim-centered approach. So when human trafficking is suspected, this victim-centered approach means that you're putting that victim's priorities, their needs, their interests at the center of your interaction with that individual. So when you encounter a potential victim, it's important to remember that a victim might not feel comfortable coming forward and really telling you what is happening. They might not feel comfortable working with any sort of authority figure. They might be scared. And then we see those kind of effects of shame. They might think that they've been doing something bad this whole time. So they don't really want to share with that with you. But it's important to understand that that could be trauma manifesting itself in a variety of different ways. But in a victim centered approach, it's important to just make that victim feel stable, safe, secure. So foster that sort of environment where a person can continue to open up with you, even if it's not that first time. Continue to be there for that person in a way that they will open up to you. So here on your screen, you see some of those trauma-informed approaches. Number one, of course, realizing, acknowledging how trauma is affecting a person. Being able to recognize signs of trauma, those fear, sadness, anger, that mistrust. We don't know what that victim has been going through. We don't know the kind of lies that they've been told, the kind of scare tactics that they've gone through with their victim, with their trafficker, excuse me. And we'll never be able to really understand that. But it's just important to be able to understand that this is how trauma is manifesting itself in that person. Uh, Victim-centered approach could also be responding and changing tones, changing your response, your delivery, your language. What's wrong becomes what happened, things like that. So really understanding language and how you are talking or getting kind of involved with the victim. And of course, resist re-traumatization by addressing that trauma, those toxic stresses in the life of both family and friends and the people that are serving. These emotions can have a significant impact on the ability to assist victims in their own personal healing process. We talk a lot about also emotional distress, can cause victims to return back to their trafficker numerous times while even receiving services or assistance in their recovery. On average, we've talked, through this kind of like network that we have of survivors, which is actually now at almost like 120 survivors. A lot of them, the average times that they go back to their trafficker after being, rescued or taken out of their initial situation is 4 times. 4 times on average, they return back to their trafficker, whether it's because of trauma bonds or they were getting paid in some sort of good that they missed, or who knows why they returned to their trafficker. A lot of different reasons. We may not understand them, but that trauma bond that they have with that trafficker is real and is strong, and they go back. Next slide, please. There are a lot of different principles here for houses of worship, and also community leaders in their house of worship, in their neighborhoods, what it may be, in their cities. So some of those principles could be create a welcoming environment, let them feel safe. That is how people are going to open up, is creating and fostering that safe environment, being transparent, trustworthiness, build relationships without including that kind of judgment or asking questions like, why did you do that? Why didn't you go get help? So keeping in mind those myths, why didn't this person just go get help if they were going through a hard time? There is a lot of different reasons why they may not have spoken up before. That peer support, seek partners in trauma recovery, being able to connect the victims to different resources to help them through their recovery is very important. Some of those resources could be housing, medical help. It could be, we've even heard that sometimes survivors want to go back to school and get their GED, want to be able to get some sort of work certificate, university. So helping them in that process so that they could take back, their life really completely. Continuing to recognize and build upon skills of communication, voice, choice, let them know that they now have control over their body, control over what they're able to say, because we do know that traffickers kind of tell them what to say. So say if you are at an airport, they'll tell their victim what to say. So they'll give them a script so people don't raise eyebrows about what they've been going through. So people don't ask questions about what they're going through. They're given scripts. We've heard it many a times that a trafficker tells their victim what to say. And of course, bring in cultural, historical, and gender issues. Be careful with this. Um, as a person, we have victims that are LGBTQ plus, two spirited. They have brought up sometimes that they are, hesitant to go to houses of worship or hesitant to bring up their issues with faith-based leaders and community organizations because they're afraid that their gender identity might get in the way. But really, a victim centered approach is putting these things aside and really focusing on that victim and their recovery process. Next slide, please. All right. So, everybody here has a role to play in raising awareness and being able to provide services for victims, for survivors. And anybody could really, continue to spreading awareness in your communities, in your houses of worship. These are just some ways that we encourage people to be able to continue, raising awareness, joining the fight. A lot of human trafficking is very combative. It's like, join this battle. But a lot of it is raising awareness, educating people about what this crime really is. You could host an event, host a speaker. So the Blue Campaign has speakers year round. We do trainings, we do different types of panels, webinars, in-person conferences. Don't be afraid to reach out and say, hey, Diego, can somebody from your team at Homeland Security Investigations come speak to our group? Come to our workshop, join us. Of course, we would love to do that. Continue sharing information on social media from reputable sources. So from sources that have been fact checked, that have been survivor informed. Everything we do here on the Blue Campaign, all of our resources are survivor informed, are informed by special agents that are on the field, that are informed by victim assistance specialists. We have an entire victim assistance program, and all of our resources go through these eyes. They go through the eyes of prosecutors, just so everything that we are putting out is accurate and is as real as can be. Continue to share messages, encourage your community and congregants to learn more about this topic of human trafficking. I mentioned that I'm under prevention. So people say, well, how do you prevent something? Well, number one is education. You can't prevent something you don't understand truly or you have questions about. You can't prevent that. So a lot of prevention is education. Identify and team up with law enforcement. I work with a variety of different task forces, and I'm called on task force meetings or different meetings between community partners and law enforcement. Some of you might be a part of these task forces. Hey, and if you're not, create that task force. Make relationships with local law enforcement. Make relationships with other local service providers. I've heard that a lot of you are service providers, but it's also important to have that relationship with law enforcement, have that relationship with Homeland Security investigations. They'll be more than happy to be able to, have conversations on how you could team up and really work together. Next slide, please. All right. So other ways, January is coming right up. January is Human Trafficking Prevention Month. This is like the Super Bowl of human trafficking awareness programs and campaigns. There's, a whole month just to really continue getting information out, educating, yourselves and really other people through hashtags. One of those big hashtags is on January 11th. It's called Wear Blue Day, where everybody is encouraged to wear blue using the hashtag, taking a picture. It could be with your organization, with your congregation, it could be with your family, and posting it online using the hashtag Wear Blue Day. And this is so, number one, we can make it go trending. So it'll be on the eyes of everybody that's using social media. And then if somebody doesn't know about human trafficking, they see Wear Blue Day, they're going to click and they're going to be like, wonder what this is. And boom, as soon as they click that Wear Blue Day, they're going to see, oh, this is human trafficking awareness. Oh, I didn't know blue was the international color of human trafficking awareness, similar to how pink is for breast cancer awareness. So it's all about really just getting education out. And we have an entire month and one big day, that Wear Blue Day on January 11th. So consider sponsoring events with your church congregation. Consider, having a Blue Campaign speaker or a different speaker come talk about this subject. There's a lot of different subjects when it comes to human trafficking awareness. So it doesn't always have to be like, what is human trafficking? No, there could be, sessions on vicarious trauma, session on how can human trafficking organizations apply for grants. Consider having all these different workshops from these magnificent subject matter experts about what is human trafficking. And of course, use hashtags and human trafficking, tackling trafficking. And hey, if you want, you could always use hashtag Blue Campaign. That won't hurt. Next slide, please. All right. So a lot of this information can be found in our toolkit. So we have an entire toolkit of faith-based community leaders available on our website. And I know you might know Blue Campaign, you might not, but we have a lot of different resources available on our website, all for free. Everything could be ordered, downloaded. You could order in bulk directly from our website. We have materials available in 38 different languages. And yes, all of this is free. Shipping, printing, delivering it to your house, delivering it to your church, all of it is free. This is just one example of those kind of toolkits that we have. So this has all the information I've shared and more, including indicators of the crime, what is human trafficking, ideas of how to host events in your congregation. All can be found in these toolkits, and all of it is on our website. If you haven't already ordered Blue Campaign materials, I highly encourage it, all for free. If your organization has been thinking about, oh, let's create some human trafficking awareness materials, don't recreate the wheel. We have materials available for you. We could even talk about partnership opportunities that could co-brand our materials with your logo, with your organization's name. So there are a lot of different opportunities also for materials. But number one step is visit our website. It's Blue Campaign. You could just Google Blue Campaign, and you'll find out a lot more of what we're offering there. I believe that is my last slide. Maybe click next and we'll see if it is. And it is. I'm going to stick around though for discussion. I look forward to questions, and yeah, thank you for that.
Great. Awesome. Awesome. Thanks so much, Diego and Felicitas. I just want to apologize, first of all, to all of you. Zoom has not been Zooming the way Zoom is supposed to Zoom. It's been it's been a challenge with us since we started the webinar, but we are so grateful for your patience. I want to just say that the webinar is being recorded, and so we'll send the recording out with our thank you note, and you'll have the slides attached as well. So I know that many of you have requested Diego's slides, so we'll be more than happy to send that out. But I just want to talk briefly and not too much about the legislative aspect to combating trafficking, and what Catholic Charities USA and other Catholic organizations, including the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, have been doing on the advocacy front to not only combat trafficking, but to also ensure that there are resources available to support survivors. So you heard about this in the beginning. Felicitas mentioned this in her presentation. So, the Trafficking Victims Protection Act of 2000 was really the first time that Congress came together to actually codify a law that would specifically address trafficking both in the United States and throughout the world. And that bill was a huge bill. It had all sorts of things in there, definitions of terms, which you've heard a lot about today throughout this presentation. It created programs to support survivors. It created a process and a mechanism through which federal law enforcement agencies, including prosecutor's office, would be resourced adequately to not only investigate trafficking crimes, but also bring people to court and charge them and bring them to judgment. And they also had provisions in there that, would that provided protections to people, especially those who are immigrants, provided them the protection they need to not only remain in the U.S. in lawful status, but to also provide access to resources so that they can rebuild their lives. And so you've heard a lot about T visas and U visas and other visa categories for people who have been victims of crime, especially trafficking and domestic violence and others. And so this bill was really big because it really addressed many different aspects of trafficking that we've talked about today, and we'll talk about in part two, the second webinar of this series. And so I just wanted to just bring this to your attention, if you weren't aware of it, that Congress actually took time, came together, worked together to put laws on the books to start addressing trafficking. Now, it wasn't a perfect bill, but it was a great start to get us to where we are today. And so over the years, there have been legislation to reauthorize the TVPA, and every 5 years, the bill comes up for reauthorization, where Congress goes back and looks at the bill again and say, well, what can we do to improve, the programs that we've established to support survivors, or what can we do to better equip law enforcement officers, both prosecutors and those in the field, to have the tools they need to investigate these crimes and go after the bad actors. And so you may have heard about the Frederick Douglass Trafficking Victims Protection Reauthorization Act. And it's just way too much to say all of that. And so you'll hear a lot of practitioners refer to it as the TVPRA. And the TVPRA has come up regularly every 5 years, where Congress looks at that first bill that they enacted, and they look for opportunities where they can further improve programs for survivors. And so the current bill that's in Congress right now is the reauthorization bill for 2023. It was introduced in the House, HR 5856. That bill passed the House with bipartisan support. And it did, it renewed some of the programs that are already existent, but it also, included additional provisions. Like I said, they always look at the bill to see how they can improve the programs that are authorized in the legislation. And this current bill that's currently going through the legislative process has been authorized through 2028. And the bill would authorize grant funding for resources to support survivors, such as housing and employment and education assistance. That's something that wasn't as accessible or authorized broadly in the previous bill, but now in this proposed legislation, it's going to expand those opportunities even further and make these resources available to survivors. It also offers additional resources for international response to trafficking. And so it's a huge bill. There's always room for refining the provisions in the bill to make sure that not only are we equipping service providers and law enforcement to combat this crime, but making sure that survivors are giving the tools that they need to recover and really get on the journey to move past this traumatic stage in their life. Another bill that I would like to highlight, and I just also want to mention, just for so we're all on the same page, there are lots of pieces of legislation that go through the legislative process every year addressing trafficking. And some, are only introduced and they really don't move forward as much as we would like them. And others actually gain some traction. Real quickly before I go to the next bullet point, the House bill has been passed, but it has not yet been taken up in the Senate. And so that's another advocacy priority for our organizations, which I'll get into in the next slide. But I just wanted to make sure that I mentioned that the bill passed the House and it's yet to be picked up in the Senate and passed. So the Impact Bill, or the Impact Human Trafficking Act, is another critical legislation that we were really pleased to see. Diego talked a lot about vicarious trauma. People who are close to people who have experienced the trauma of trafficking, whether they're, law enforcement officers that are investigating these crimes, or maybe family members. A lot of trauma comes through from secondhand experience, just helping people navigate through, the challenges that they have to navigate through as they try to recover from the trauma of trafficking. And so this bill really, lawmakers looked at, what was happening in DHS, the DHS Homeland Investigations, DHS Security DHS Homeland Security Investigations. Sorry, the alphabet soup. Want to make sure I tell you what HSI is. The Homeland Security Investigations Department within DHS is the department that really focuses on investigating trafficking crimes in the United States. And a lot of officers, as you heard Diego mention, they go to some of the most remote places throughout the country and the various territories to not only investigate these crimes, but also try to rescue people, victims. And so there's a lot of trauma that come with that, right? The training, being exposed to some of the conditions people live in, being exposed to the stories and the experiences that people have to recount in the investigation of the crimes that they're living through. All of that really impacts the people that are investigating these crimes and rescuing these survivors. And so Congress looked at it and thought, you know what, why don't we create a program that would provide additional resources for training, but also provide support for the people that are on the front lines, the law enforcement officers that are on the front lines, combating these issues day in and day out. And this bill also would authorize the Victim Assistance Program. And again, we talked about a lot of the victim resources that are in the TVPRA. But this other bill will really focus on the victim-centered approach that Diego talked about, right? How do we center that person who has been through so much at the core of our investigation? How do we bring the right people into this investigation to ensure that we're approaching it in the most delicate way so that survivors are given the tools and support they need to move past this difficult moment in their life? I know we're getting close to time, so I'll move quickly through the next few slides. I talked briefly about advocacy in the previous slide, particularly with the TVPRA. There are several other initiatives that we're advocating for when it comes to trafficking, but because of time, we really can't talk about all of them. I just want to share with you, the most recent that we've done as a collective. Catholic Charities USA joined the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, Catholic Relief Services, and Catholic Health Association in a letter, expressing support and appreciation for the bill, the HR 5856, the TVPRA bill, which would reauthorize services for programs that provide services to survivors. And so this bill again has been passed in the House, and we sent this letter to Capitol Hill, really urging the Senate to take up the bill and pass it by the end of this legislative session, because again, it's critical for us to make sure that the resources are not only provided, but expanded to ensure that it's really responding to the ever-growing needs of people that are really getting past their trafficking experience. And I would be remiss if I don't, talk about the impact of Catholic Charities agencies in the space when it comes to responding to trafficking. There are many Catholic Charities agencies on this webinar, and others have worked closely with Catholic Charities agencies as well in their communities to support survivors. And over 90 of the 168 Catholic Charities agencies throughout the U.S. and the U.S. territories provide support to survivors in many different forms. The goal is to really respond to their needs holistically, emotionally, spiritually, as well as physically, making sure that not only are they providing trauma-informed care, but they're making sure that they have stable and safe housing, making sure that they have food and nutrition. Counseling is a critical piece of some of the services the Catholic Charities agencies provide. Some agencies also provide immigration legal services for non-citizens who have been survivors of trafficking, and employment services, right? Many people come out of this and they want to rebuild their lives, or they want to go back to the lives that they had, and rebuild, and get resources and stand on their own feet. And so employment services is another form of service that's provided through Catholic Charities agencies. Before I open it up for Q&A, I just want to remind all of us that we have a two-part, this is a two-part webinar, and the second webinar will take place on July 30th, 2024. It's going to focus on the role of law enforcement and service providers, and you'll hear a lot more about the types of services that the Catholic Charities Network offers to survivors, but you'll hear directly from a representative of the Homeland Security Investigations Office, who actually does this work, investigate these crimes, have talked to thousands of survivors, have been in the trenches really responding to these kinds of crimes, and how they've been working hand in hand in a community with service providers to make sure that survivors are giving the right support and tools that they need. So I'll go ahead and pause here and stop sharing my screen, and we'll take your questions. I know that there are a lot of questions in the chat, so we'll just pause here. And Felicitas, do you want to maybe start us off with the questions? I know you were monitoring the chat.
Yeah, I'll start here with Fran had a question. It says, thank you so much for your joint letter to the Senate on HR 5856. Since it was passed in the House so overwhelmingly and with bipartisan support, do we know why it hasn't been taken up by the Senate?
That's a great question. And frankly, we don't know why things happen on Capitol Hill. But that does not deter us from advocating nonetheless. We reach out and emphasize the urgency of this bill, and urge, members of Congress, especially in the Senate, to take up this important bill. Senators across the aisle and in both parties have expressed their commitment to ensuring that trafficking is at the top of their list of priorities to combat and make sure the resources are available. So we know there's interest there, but it's Washington, D.C. The things that we all hope would advance as quickly as we all want them to don't really happen that well or often, but we'll do the best that we can and continue to advocate for the bill.
Great. Thanks, Christy. Someone here asked, what would be the best way to find a speaker to come to our parishes on dhs.gov? We would love to have an event here with a speaker. I assume that's for you, Diego.
Yeah. I think it could just really, the process is not that hard. There is no fee associated. You could email me directly. We have a very short form that you could just send back to me. And pretty much this is one-way conversation, two-way, I guess. Between you and I, we could just have a conversation and, make that possible. And then in the instance that somebody from Blue Campaign is not able to travel, because we're all located here in Washington, D.C., we do use a lot of our colleagues. So Homeland Security Investigations has offices throughout the country. So we would be able to utilize a subject matter expert that might be closer to you that could come and speak with your group. But I did put my email in the chat.
Yeah, I just pasted it in there for everyone to have as well.
Perfect. Yeah. Feel free to reach out, and we could get that process started.
Yeah, great. And USCCB is also, available with CCUSA to do trainings on this stuff for those that are interested. So then how does one get trained to facilitate sessions with or for the Blue campaign?
So we do not have a sort of like a train the trainer, volunteer sort of somebody, being able to represent Blue campaign. But I think that anybody here has the ability to have, these conversations and to, bring human trafficking awareness to your congregations, to your groups. Um, 4 years ago, I didn't know much about what human trafficking is. I had seen it in some things that I was doing for work, but through materials, through just stories, through Blue Campaign, a lot of that information, I was able to just learn about the subject. So I think everybody has it in their own hands to be able to bring this information to their group. So yeah, I encourage you all just to, do some reading. We could have conversations if you want to get clarity on something. Please, my email is open. We could have these conversations on, things to focus on when speaking to your groups about human trafficking. We've done this quite a bit.
Yeah. And then another question, what are some red flags that might be obvious or not obvious signs of trafficking?
Might be obvious, there's not obvious signs. I think it really depends, who we're speaking about. There are no like one indicator fits all sort of
Mhm.
for human trafficking victims. I work with young, so adults that work with youth. So I work a lot with social workers and volunteers, mentors. And I think some of those kind of unique indicators for, say, kids could be running away from home, frequently, and they were probably not known to do that, skipping school, and they were
Mhm.
not known to do that, getting suspended from school. A lot of those kind of indicators with young people are not going to be relevant for a lot of different, potential victims. We also have a lot of indicators for, say, like the transportation industry. So those could be somebody not being able to provide like travel details, somebody not knowing where their next location is. So I think in specific scenarios, indicators are going to be different. Indicators at an airport are going to look very different than indicators, say, in a public school setting.
For sure. Yeah. Yeah. I would also like to add that a lot of times what we see in trafficking is kind of co-occurring issues, right? So sometimes the signs that we see for a victim of trafficking, um, signs of like assault or like physical abuse can also co-occur with like domestic violence or other forms of violence, or co-occurring issues with criminalization, right? So people with substance use disorders or just other criminal behaviors, which also affects prosecution. So that can kind of be a barrier, as well as an indicator, I think, when identifying trafficking situations. But Diego, I think, pointed out the indicators look different for different categories of trafficking situations. And there's another question that says, can you send the organizations to whom we should report?
Um, yeah, so it would be kind of a lengthy. So the ones that I mentioned, so the ones, of course, I have to mention Homeland Security. We have a reporting tip line. It's not only to report human trafficking potential cases. That could be, it's a general kind of reporting tip line. It's the ICE tip line. For minors and runaway youth, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, they have a reporting mechanism as well. And then there's also the National Human Trafficking Hotline. I could put that in the chat right now. This is one that is operated by a non-governmental organization. They're actually here based out of Washington, D.C. as well. There are a lot of different ways that somebody could submit a tip there. So there's a chat function where you could chat one-on-one with somebody from that hotline. There's a call version. So a lot of different ways there. And there's also, if we're talking about organizations, there's a referral directory where you could find local services for, maybe that somebody comes up to you and is looking for some sort of local services, but you don't know where to go. They have a find local services platform on the National Human Trafficking Hotline where you could input your zip code and it will show you all the organizations that have some sort of nexus to human trafficking prevention, awareness, protection in your community. I think that's a pretty good tip
Yeah.
service there.
Yeah. Yeah. And oftentimes I know DC, for example, if you Google like services like legal services or shelter or like homes or shelters or things like that, specifically for trafficking, the DC government page has like a website with organizations and stuff. So I think that also varies for other states too. I'm sure like your local state might have a resource page for organizations that are doing this work or some parts of the work like case management services or um, legal aid and things like that. So I always encourage everyone to just Google um, in case they have more questions.
To that by saying that check your local Catholic Charities website, right? Your local Catholic Charities may have an entire, service portfolio on trafficking, and the providers there at that location may be able to help you navigate the reporting process. Many times, law enforcement agencies will refer people to Catholic Charities for support and assistance and counseling. And so they have that good relationship with their local law enforcement or even, the federal law enforcement agencies. So they'll be able to provide that information. As I mentioned, the second webinar on the 30th is where you'll hear directly from Catholic Charities service provider, as well as a federal law enforcement agent who actually leverages their relationship with, nonprofits and other community organizations that serve survivors. And they'll tell you how invaluable that relationship is to not only, encouraging victims to assist in investigation, but also make sure that they're giving the resources and support that they need. So don't miss it. Register. I think I see the link. Yep, there's the link in the chat. Please go ahead and register. We don't want you to miss that information as well.
Great
Yeah.
part two. So that's my colleague, and one of his main topics is collaborating on purpose. So really looking forward to part two. Yeah, register. Great
Yeah.
colleague. He's with us at the Center for Countering Human Trafficking, Dr. Gilmer. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love hearing him speak.
That's
Yeah,
great.
and if Catholic Charities of Louisville, Kentucky is on the call, thank you for agreeing to participate in the webinar on the 30th. They're the ones, they have a phenomenal program called the Bakita Empowerment Program at their agency. It's a whole suite of services for people who are survivors. So you don't want to miss the webinar.
Yeah, and these webinars will be recorded and posted on YouTube as well for people to chime in and kind of take a look at it afterwards if they're needed to be. But I know a lot of people had questions on sharing the slides, so we will share the slides and the recording for those that were interested in it, as well as I'm sure there was more people that registered that were probably waiting for the recording as well. So we'll be able to share that for everyone. I just really want to say thank you so much, Christy and Diego, for participating and joining on this effort with us. We're so grateful, and thanks to everyone for joining on the call. We're really so grateful to be able to provide this information. And we're really looking forward to next week and just continuing to this partnership.
Great. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. All right, everyone. Have a good day, weekend. Oh my gosh, it's Thursday.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Bye-bye.